So today I'm going to attempt this. And the reason why I say attempt is it's very difficult to get across to people that have never considered it before. All right? But if you run a business, if you own a business, people are going to be the most expensive piece, like human resources, right? So you want to make sure you optimize everything for them and also optimize it so that you don't need more humans than necessary. All right, and also, I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole. It's like there's so many complications. Yes, people are required. I get it. But what happens when your business becomes stressed financially, and usually it's because it's bloated with too many people and it's not efficient. What happens is the frustration is like the human frustration. Remember, software doesn't experience any frustration. So the humans are frustrated. And that energy is inside your business because there's like busy, not productive, I can go down. It doesn't matter. What we're going to talk about many times, this is day 3. What we're going to talk about is bandwidth. Okay? Bandwidth. Day 3. Bandwidth. Like I said, this many times we'll have to talk about this. Many. But I want to get across the idea of how you need to consider a human being's role, how much time it takes to do something, and then, with the workflow, where they interact with software or the deliverable, the product or the service, and you want to maximize, you want to optimize that, because then you don't have to bloat the business with human resources unnecessarily, and that can get expensive. And on average, it's a push and pull. But if you can imagine labor being one of the things that I would notice a business is leaking money is in unnecessary human resources, right? Because I look at the whole system as a digital system first, insert human here. So that's like, I don't want to be the reason that your institution doesn't require as many people working for it, because that's how you would save money, and then et cetera. But that's just how it works, right? If you don't need as many people working in your organization, that's a great place to start to save money that can be redirected somewhere else, right? And I know where people will come at me and they'll say, well, what about people need jobs, et cetera. I'm like, I can't have that mindset anymore, because I look at efficiency and optimization first, the most efficient first, right? So let's do this way. So bandwidth, right? So let's look at it from like a human bandwidth, okay? And then human, it doesn't have to be just human, but that's what you're that's what you're paying for, right? Is the human being's salary, wage, whatever, okay? And let's say you have a 5-person team, right? A 5-person team. And then to make it easy, remember, we just make up numbers here. This is fictional, but at the same time, we're building a perfect business for you. So let's just imagine that each one of them is $50,000 a year, right? Let's just imagine that's like we've salarized. I mean, we can go wages and start to break down how much per hour, et cetera, but let's do that, right? Now that means that remember, there is a maximum. Here's where it gets difficult. There is 2 different maximums for this. One of them is the maximum amount of labor that they want to do, right? Versus what you expect of them and they have to do. That becomes some distortion, because no one wants to work for someone else and run themselves ragged unless, maybe that's their choice. Maybe that's their choice. They love working like a dog, okay? That's fine. And they exist, those people exist, but you can't set your expectations that high for your whole team, right? Like that's an insanity, especially at this is just for math. We're gonna make it easy. Like, I mean, even if you wanted to, we could just go, let's give everybody a raise, right? Let's go 100K. So that's like 500K a year, right? For a 5-person team. You know where I'm going with this now. That's a lot. That's a substantial amount economically stressing your business. Remember, it's a net. You want to make money. That's what business is for. So you don't want to break even. You don't want to have no profit. You don't want to have, so like, how does that work out? Right? Like if you can understand that if you can bring this down to 4, well, there you go. You just saved $100,000 a year. Okay? And that doesn't mean you're going to put stress on the entire business. If your workflow is optimized, you're using the most automation, everything, that's how it's supposed to work. And then you don't have to worry about like increasing this to 6 unnecessarily or 7 unnecessarily, right? There's like so many things about bandwidth that I noticed that people they're not calculating, because it's like, if this is the excuse, they're there already, right? Like we already hired them, they have a role and a responsibility, and they're already there. So like, let's get them to do other things. Let's get them to do as many things as possible without burning them out inside the organization, under, in the category of what that they're hired for, to some extent. It gets really difficult when you have a very, very tight team and people start sharing hats and responsibilities, and then you kind of have a pool of responsibilities and salary at the same time, right? It's like a pool. So you kind of look at it as, if we don't have to hire anymore, let's just all maximize our bandwidth between each other as a whole. You following me here, right? Remember I said the expectations of an owner might be different than the expectations personally for that team member. And that's a mess. It gets to be a mess, because like you're projecting and you can't do that, because it's like just another reason why someone doesn't want to work for your institution, right? They're like, oh yeah, I love this business that I work with because they run me like a dog, or I work for this other business and they're managing my bandwidth for me, right? Because they're future forward. They're helping me with my bandwidth personally inside the team and the team's bandwidth, because the owner has made the right decisions to use the most automation, the best workflows, native integrations. They've curated an app stack so the ecosystem is built for optimized bandwidth in a team, right? That's who they want to work for, versus throw everybody at the problem. Throw whoever isn't doing something at the problem right now, just because they're there already. That right there, if you're an owner and you're like that, get ready for like a rude awakening if you haven't already started experiencing it. Because there's no chance that's the way anymore. That's why remote work is being leveraged. It's because they're trying to any business, enterprise or small business, is trying to find ways to save money, right? And then they're optimizing things, and then they're figuring out that maybe there's a team A and a team B, and team A may be the one that wants to work harder. So, give them the opportunity to come back to the office, have have a way end at the office because they want to go. They're hardcore workers. And then you have remote work, which is why I think that the leverage is on purpose to skim the workforce, like to chop the workforce down, because how easy is it to fire a remote worker? So remote work, I know it sounds like I'm going off on a tangent, but there's so much to talk about. Remote work is actually like a way of separating the workforce. So you really want to work remotely, to the owner is like team B maybe, because what they're doing is they're giving you what you want, paying you no different, using it as leverage to determine that you're not what your KPI is, what their worth is to you. Like how much does that remote benefit the business? Are we more productive as a business because of it? And if you're in that remote work team B and you don't know that, well, all they're doing is they're just supercharging the nucleus, the HR nucleus, and then there's concentric rings outside, and then you just slowly eliminate the rings. You know, you pull in, and then the rings on the outside are the ones of the staff, team members that you either absorb the roles and responsibilities into the nucleus, into the center concentric circles, and the other ones you just delete. You just delete them, and you make a tighter team. That's scary shit. Okay, because it makes sense from like an analytics perspective, right? Like of course you would do that because this costs so much money. You know, like you gotta imagine that like pandemic, we have a resource problem in terms of how we work in our business. We're trying to minimize, optimize, like that's why they're targeting HR. That's why I said this is going to be it's hard to do bandwidth in one day. We'll do many times like this, but you have to understand that like you bringing this down like to a smaller team in a small business scenario is in the best interest of conserving money so that you can stay alive longer and also your net. Like everything makes more sense because you're not just throwing human beings' time at the problem. Right? And and the worst part is if you are in the business of hiring and laying off based on the performance of the business, and there's a lot of field service is famous for this, construction, field service, whatever. I mean, it's usually the same thing. It's like supply and demand. That I understand. However, I think that supply and demand bandwidth ratio, that old understanding of human resource bandwidth is like you're so used to it that when you're calculating the numbers, you don't really calculate a new bandwidth strategy because you know how to do it the old way. Throw people's time at the problems when you get busy, which is wrong, right? Tighten up everything so that as you scale, this is the thing, the word that you'll miss is scale. You'll think grow is the same word. But the problem is you're not looking at it from a full digital startup perspective, right? And I'm not saying that you can be full digital. You might have some analog things in there, totally understandable. But what I'm saying is that a startup calculates these things so that the scale is kind of real time and affordable with supply and demand. Like everything's so optimized that it's like we know when to scale and it's easy. Because it's just plus one human, roles and responsibilities or whatever, right? So this is a mess. I told you it was going to be a mess. I don't have a choice. I don't have a freaking choice. It's too hard to describe all of this at once. So human bandwidth, optimizing it is a huge cost savings in a business. Because when you're at the business, like I said, you build the business and then insert humans. And it just makes sense to have a proper workflow worked out inside software so that you can manage this stuff digitally instead of guessing. There's so much guess when it comes to what a human being is worth and what they do for a small or medium business. Because it's an expense. You put human resources salary in an expense category. And as long as you're netting, right, whatever you think you want to profit, you're profiting. But so you won't adjust anything because you're like, it won't do much. But that's where you're wrong. That's where you're wrong because when you're the slowest, when business is the slowest, right, you might still be able to save and make if you optimize, right? You don't just have to be busy. Right? Which is crazy to me for you to profit. You can profit if you do the adjustments now, you might be able to profit immediately. Because you can imagine how many unnecessary plates are spinning. You can imagine how many unnecessary handoffs are happening, replication, duplication, all the unnecessaries that are overlap, You know, it's all that unnecessary that causes bandwidth to go through the goddamn roof for a business. All of that. So let's go now, just so that you get the idea, right? Now let's just dive into bandwidth a little bit more. And like I said, I'm going to have to do this like a whole bunch of times because there's so many things to talk about. And a lot of it's new, and a lot of it I made up. Not made up, but kind of I'm defining. I'm really defining certain things in terms of the new business. That's why I call business design is like for a perfect business, because you want it not to leak any time or money unnecessarily, and you want to be able to just scale to infinity, right? So let's do bandwidth again. Okay, bandwidth. And here are some words that make it, like, drive it home. And it's easy. It's actually easier than it is. So let's go distortion. Right? Let's go lag. So bandwidth distortion, bandwidth lag, right? And then bandwidth, there's so many of them. Like, I'm still writing this stuff down. Transparency. Right? Now, a few of them, another one that I would like to say is optimization, right? But I think that bandwidth optimization is understood. That's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to optimize bandwidth. So even though bandwidth optimization is kind of like a procedure, I would say that you would just understand that's what you want to do, right? So then they've bandwidth breakers, bandwidth vampires. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to use red. I'm going to use red. Check it out. Vampires. Okay? If you grasp this, if this goes and it becomes so normalized with you, you will turn your business into a machine, a weaponized machine. Right? Because this is where it breaks down hard, financially hard, because of the cost of labor, the cost of human beings, right? And it's like, and then at the end of the year, or the end of the quarter, you're calculating based on that huge expense, and it fucking sucks. Like, I get it, because it's like, you now think, and I mean, this is why watching this channel could be really offensive to some people, because I always say, well, now you get it. How long have you been not doing this? How long? How many years have you been not optimizing bandwidth inside your team, connected to your workflow, your processes, and your operation, the whole business? How long? If it's like 10, 15, 20 years, you might have been able to save a whole salarized person per year. So and if you were to take that salary as, against the business and just put it into a holdings company, well, let's say it was $100K, and let's say 15 years, there's more than $1.5 million. That's like 12 times 100K plus, it's like what is it, 18 times 100K, right? So $1.8 million. Whoa. That would drive, I would have to go for a long walk right now. It's okay, you can pause the video and watch it later, but you might want to do one of those, or like take a cold shower or whatever, because that's a lot of money. Right? I'm going to put something else down here, and it's like bandwidth expectations, managing bandwidth expectations. I think that it's just so that you understand that the managing expectations is what people want. Managing bandwidth expectations. That right here is probably in transparency. So let's go through these definitions right now, okay? So bandwidth distortion, to me, and now to you, is when one business or a team inside it doesn't know everything together. Like, they're not on the same page. And then also, so say for example, they're like business one, and then they're interacting with business two, right? So here's business one, here's business two, there's them interacting, right here. The distortion happens, I think, mostly when, say, business one is fully in the future, using all the new things, Slack, Microsoft Teams, a project management interface, time tracking, they're basically storing files properly, Google Drive or SharePoint or whatever, I don't care, they're in the future. They're using Calendly for Teams, they're in the future. Bandwidth distortion is when business two is not, they're just using email. Right? They're just using email. And then business-to-business communication, the distortion happens because, obviously B2 is wasting bandwidth of B1 because they're not using the best technologies, so there's a distortion, right? So bandwidth distortion is it pollutes all of business because you have to slow down for two, right? Or you have to change things in your system that are fully optimized for two. It's you're from the future and they're not willing to change, and the problem is that they think the technologies that they're using they get them by, but because they haven't asked any questions the status quo or anything like that, they might be super behind. But they got a website. They got a website with info as an email address. We're rock and roll. We're good to go. We also have a 1-866 number. I totally understand this distortion all the time. But it also takes place inside the team. If not everybody is on the same page, then there's some sort of bandwidth distortion, right? So it's kind of generalized. I think that it should be more for, powering your business into the future, interacting with the rest of business, the rest of the world, right? What is lag? Bandwidth lag. And I'm just going to generally go over these. So bandwidth lag is when there is basically the same thing that I talked about before, when there's a something happens here, and it's so your workflow, and then it stops. And then for it to continue, there's something that happens here that needs to be fixed. And so your bandwidth, you have a lag in the transmission of information from point 1 to point 2 inside the process, right? So inside the process, from whatever node to node, there's a breakdown. And that lag costs you time. Which costs you. We don't have to do this, but I'm going to write money because it's the same thing, basically, right? So time, money, lost, lag. So obviously you want to figure out how not to have any lag, or in the best case scenario, as little as possible, right? As little as possible. And if you're not benchmarking anything, you have no idea, let's just say someone like myself or the automated method would be able to figure out what that is for you. Right? And then you would be able to apply that all over the place. I don't want lag. So the things are, you don't want distortion and you don't want lag. You do want transparency, and I'll get into that one in a second. Let's just jump right in. Bandwidth transparency is probably going to, you could probably put that on my tombstone, because I think it's something that isn't really popular yet. But because I'm doing things like this, it might actually be popular. Bandwidth transparency is a very future-forward concept of taking the whole business's bandwidth and letting everybody know what everybody's doing all the time. No silo-based anything, a real-time status, updated calendar ecosystem. Not just I'm available in Slack or I'm available in Teams, or I don't have my out of office turned on in my email, which is thanks 2005, get out. But the transparency idea, usually it's product specific. So I would say in terms of bandwidth transparency, you'd have a shared calendar, but not just a shared calendar anymore. You'd have something like Calendly for Teams, and then everybody can see when people are available. That's where, I need to go down that rabbit hole again. But I'm just saying bandwidth transparency is what people want. People want people that are the workforce that want to work for you, the business owner. If you advertise, that you have bandwidth transparency, you're using certain applications, your app stack, your ecosystem, whatever in your cloud world that is your business, that promote transparency. But like I said, you might have just learned about it right now. A lot of people don't know what that is. It is super forward. It really is, because you can imagine that if the team works together to optimize bandwidth between each other without you, I don't know if I need to say anything else, but that's awesome. One of the really forward ideas about bandwidth transparency that I find that I mention is like, we don't have the 9 to 5 anymore. So why not have an opportunity for personal life, your work-life balance, to actually be truth in your team? I use the example of if you are working in outcomes and not hours, and you're salarized, you would be able to use your time wisely as long as everything was where it was supposed to be. If the KPI for your business was optimized, and you wanted to go on a 4-hour hike on a Wednesday between 12 and 4, you could tell the team in your shared calendar. That's forward, because that's what people want, right? People want this like freedom to have a work-life balance without fucking lying, because that's what they do. They lie. You can't hide anymore. It's the craziest thing in the entire world that, everybody has their own method to hide from software or from other team members inside the team, or business to business, like, we're closed, even though I know I have an email and it's connected on my phone, and if you email it, I'll probably read it at 2 o'clock in the morning, but we're closed. Anyway, very forward, we'll get into that. Breakers, actually, these two I'm going to talk about together, but let's just talk about expectations. So bandwidth expectations are obviously how you keep people happy, right? Because you know what the bandwidth is of the institution, so you don't have to get to that point. This is why it's agile. I don't want to use, here we go, I'm going to write the A word. It's one of those words where it doesn't mean shit to a lot of people. People are like, oh, no. We want to be agile. We want to be agile. I can't, it goes along with, we want to get efficient. You know what I mean? We want to optimize. All those words, agile's in there, right? And it's being able to pivot instantaneously based on, whatever's happening in the market or in your business, for your business. Whatever. It's lip service. Let's be honest. If anybody tells me that they're agile, I'm like, okay, prove it, right? I want to see a dashboard. And I also want to see metrics that you can input synthetically, like a simulation of where the demand increases by 500%. So let's do that right now. Wait, you can't do real-time projections? Why not? Oh, you wait but you just told me you're agile. So you're agile, but you can't do real-time projections by simulating data. See what I mean? So that word right there, anybody says it, I'm already waiting. I'm is it my turn to speak for the rest of whatever time you have to listen? Because it's just lip service. Anyway, I digress. Let's go down the better rabbit hole here. I've been waiting all day to talk about this. Bandwidth breakers. This is where this starts. Could be the same as lag, but usually it's something that can change with a better software package or a better workflow or just a better employee. Right away. Because I mentioned operational fluency, right? So that's that was day 2, was operational fluency. So with operational fluency, everybody knows the process, everybody knows the workflow. Now you add bandwidth transparency to this business, and you have people all working together, and then you have a bandwidth breaker happen. And I would call a fuse popping in the daily routine system of your business, right? When that happens, once again, okay, you have a bandwidth breaker, here it is, time and money, right? The bandwidth breaker, time and money. So you really want to figure out all of this at the same time. Your operations, your HR, your bandwidth, right? Time equals money, day 1, boom. Usually the breakers, if they're human beings, wow, that's when we're going to call them bandwidth vampires, okay? What do? Well, other than it sounds exactly other than what it sounds like, let's imagine that for your up until now, you've wanted a word, some sort of description of that team member that ruins it for everybody else. Ruins everybody's bandwidth, affects everybody's KPI, affects everybody's performance because they suck bandwidth out of the whole institution for themselves by usually not using the proper technologies that have been provided or ignoring the new technologies because they're happy using the ones that they're comfortable with, even though it's been mandated that is the way we do stuff now. That is our workflow. We did a workflow audit and we used to be email junkies. All we did was email, I get it. But then that was a few years ago and we implemented Slack or Microsoft Teams, And then they're like, yeah, but I know it's there, but I'm okay with email. And then I come around and I go, break my goddamn brain trying to figure out how to put those people into a category because they cost so much time and money. My God. Like, if you're a business owner, get some popcorn, man, because it's awesome. Because this bandwidth vampires concept is now in the ethos, right? It's out there. It's on social media. It's here. That's good. Because those people now can be identified by themselves. They will be identified by your team. They will be identified by you. If you're an owner, you probably are one too. But I'm just saying, it corrects itself by being identified. Because it's ridiculous. You provide an app stack. You provide native integration. You provide workflow that's perfect for 2021 going forward, using the right apps and making an ecosystem, a cloud ecosystem, because it's obviously cloud for your whole business. And you're in the business of making sure that everybody's taken care of, they're happy and their performance is, you're basically managing their bandwidth expectations by providing bandwidth transparency. Now you would know why if you had 5 team members or 25 team members and one of them is breaking it for everybody, now they can be identified as the people breaking it for everybody. Right? That's why bandwidth I became fascinated with it over quarantine because everybody was trying to save money and then everybody wants to use the newest technologies to benefit the newest tools for their team, and it doesn't have to, but more remote, which it should be already, and it obviously kind of already is for someone who just starts using all the right apps and blah, 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 blah. But the human beings that don't adapt, the ones that don't evolve and adapt, are costing you money by being a bandwidth breaker. So those bandwidth vampires out there that suck the fucking bandwidth out of the whole, you're basically sucking time and money from the institution as a whole. Now, mathematically, I don't know what that could be. But if you start using everything you should, we will be able to tell you how much you are wasting. Period. That's what happens with all digital analytics. It's data. So all we have to do is figure out a formula to basically remove bandwidth vampires, find out all those nodes, all those pieces of data, and then you can apply it to your whole ecosystem. And then I guess you're going to have to talk to everybody about this because you might have a few shame quits. You might have a few people that just can't take it because they don't want to change. But listen, man, you're a business owner and you can't let, how crazy is that you wouldn't change for something that saves time and money and makes everybody happier with bandwidth transparency? right? That's like and that's what you want to do as an owner. So if you got like a few bad apples in there that aren't willing to change, bandwidth vampires inside your organization, you need to start talking about that, because it will never go away. It will never go away. It will go away when like they go away, or that it becomes a healthier environment, and then everybody looks at it as, oh, you're right. I'm doing this and affecting my peers, affecting my team, affecting the performance of the business because I'm selfish. And I'm afraid to change, but usually it's selfish. I juggle between the two of those, because the fear to change, it's just a muscle memory thing. And the thing is, they'll benefit from it too. But vampires will, they can be adjusted with understanding what bandwidth is now, and then they can also be like, oh, transparency is awesome, I love it, I'm no longer a vampire. I'm all for bandwidth transparency. You see how it works? I think that's enough for today.